Decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. There are a couple of posts this week on the gentle topic of weeds, and they got me to thinking about my own journey to my current understanding of the little feckers and how they don't bother me anymore. So let's go on a journey. My first ever garden as a child was a small 1 metre square attempt at growing wheat from my Irish neighbour's chook feed. Without knowing it, this was the first time I would reenact the Neolithic. Making stone tools at university many years later as part of my degree in archaeology was another, but that's an entirely different podcast episode. With the wheat garden, I barely got my seed back. Grain growing was when I and the Neolithic bumped up against weeds. Those first farmers and I created a space for food, and the weeds dropped by. I assumed the weed seeds were just there, even though there was no evidence of these weeds in the grass that had been growing there before my wheat experiment. I followed the usual path and hand-pulled the weeds and hand-pulled weeds for years without thought. It was just what had to be done. It is still considered the only way by many. I recently observed for 3 months the workings of a certified organic farm. Beef, dairy, pigs and horticulture. The livestock seem to be managed in a rational way, rotational grazing, if not regenerative grazing, but rotational nonetheless, and the animals all glowed with health. The horticultural aspect was another story altogether, and it fits in with our theme of the episode, weeds. This is what I observed. Black plastic sheeting across the ground for 2 weeks, presumably to kill off any growing weeds by denying them sunlight. The heat generated by the sun on the black plastic would then solarise them and any seeds near the surface. The garden bed, 80-odd metres by 1.5, was turned with a mouldboard plough. Compost was added as top dressing and the bed left for 2 days, then rotivated, then shaped into furrows for Jerusalem artichokes and or potatoes, or into flat beds for seedlings with a soil shaper. So the soil was worked 3 times. For some crops, another layer of black plastic was laid on the soil and planted through. For the tubers and some seedlings, it was left uncovered. The tubers grew up through the soil and the soil surface was covered almost entirely with, in inverted commas, weeds, as were the seedling beds not covered with black plastic. Hours were then spent removing the weeds and leaving the soil bare. We'll leave aside the CO2 release with each turning of the soil. The black plastic and the solarisation of the upper levels of the soil means death for any soil biota in that region, including, I assume, weed seeds. Turning the soil to place this solarised soil under simply brought any deeper seeds to the surface. A cycle of continuing efforts and frustrations. Remember, all this is on a certified organic farm. So the techniques, the plastic, the ploughing and the weeding are all part of a system that grants a status to the farm that the farm is doing the right thing for the planet. Took me a couple of days to work out what was going on from a philosophical standpoint. This was the John Seymour way of organic farming, with horses replaced with diesel, and there was an awful lot of diesel used. Again, this farm had been certified for decades and was therefore under a certification worked out long before the CO2 impacts of farming. Even this sort of farming were understood. The point is that organic doesn't mean natural, it means lack of chemicals. And that's not the same thing. There are other ways, back to my personal journey, which I hope will help others. Somewhere in my reading, Fukuoka or Mollison, I came across the concept of agricultural ecology. To be fair, we had covered biological succession in early high school science, and that combined with the agricultural ecology started to make sense. Indeed, these 2 ideas and the deeper understanding of evolution that studying archaeology had instilled brought me to a different view of weeds. The standard definition of a weed is a plant in the wrong place. Wrong place for whom? Clearly not for the weed. So why is the weed there? What is its function? Not from a farmer's point of view, but from nature's. There were 2 weeds, in inverted commas again, that I've had trouble with, blackberry and Scotch thistle. Blackberry had overrun an orchard I took over. Blackberry is a problem across most of eastern Australia below the tropics. In the tropics, you can substitute the word lantana for blackberry, and the same story will hold true. What does the blackberry plant do in the ecosystem of a paddock? It grows rapidly, spreads across land like wildfire, and if we look closely, holds the soil still, forms a matrix of support. Beneath the soil, it stores nutrients in thickened roots, saving them from being washed away in rainfall events. I was coming to the realisation that blackberries were a natural defence against overgrazing. Where the ground cover was insufficient to hold the soil, blackberries appeared as if by magic, and mostly kept stock off the overgrazed soil as well. Given the predominantly shallow soils of Australia, this is something that occurs quite regularly. What to do? The chemical approach is to spray with glyphosate. This has the effect of killing some percentage of the blackberry, but does not repair the underlying problem of its insufficient soil coverage. Therefore, the conditions for the return of the blackberries are sown in their chemical destruction. A nice little earner if you sell glyphosate. The plants will also sprout from the roots as they have a nutrient store down there for just such an emergency. I wasn't keen to douse anything in glyphosate, but what to do? I saw the problem thusly. Blackberry arose where there was insufficient ground cover, either living or, I hoped, as mulch. Blackberry would regrow at every opportunity until its root reserves were depleted. So, could regular, say once a week, slashing of the above ground part of the plant create a mulch to cover the soil and deplete the underground stores at the same time? As it turned out, yes. In one long hot summer, behind a domestic lawnmower and a pair of secateurs, I cleared 3/4 of an acre of blackberry and restored a thick sward beneath the orchard. Results may vary by location, but the point I'm making is this. To remove a weed species requires an understanding of the ecology of the weed, its place in the ecosystem of the paddock, and an understanding of its life cycle. Combining these to remove the ecological niche in which the weed can flourish means the weed is gone for good. Now to Scotch thistle. When I moved onto a 5-acre block down on the Snowies at the start of a winter, I noticed somewhat overgrazed paddocks. That spring, thistles erupted out of the ground. I chipped them like a madman. They grew back and flowered at ground level. That didn't work. The next spring, the soil was better covered, but the thistles took off. Chipping hadn't worked. Back to the ecological thoughts. What do thistles do? They sent down deep taproots to draw nutrients from the subsoil. They form rosettes and cover the ground to protect it. The next step was to think about the life cycle of the thistle. 1 year's seeding equals 7 years weeding, as the old saying goes. I decided to pull out the trusty old domestic lawnmower, and this bit was critical only once the first signs of purple appeared in the seed heads. My reasoning was this. The plant could not produce new seed heads once the first ones moved into seed maturation. Cutting them before the seeds matured meant they wouldn't be viable, so I waited, telling sceptical neighbours I had a plan. They didn't seem convinced. I hit the thistles as soon as I saw the first purple in the seed heads. Some of them were 7 foot high, so I knew I had reasonable soil under them. Long story short, it worked, and the thistles never returned. The sward thickened up, the sheep kept it lush as they rotated about, and all was right in heaven and on earth. Well, on that little patch of the planet I was responsible for anyway. So what am I trying to say? Weeds arise only when the ecological niche they'll fill is created by the hands of humans or nature. Most of the weeds in the vegetable gardens on the organic farm mentioned above are pioneer plants. When the glaciers retreated at the end of the Pleistocene and we entered the Holocene some 10,000-ish years ago, bare ground was the gift of the retreating glaciers. Nature abhors bare soil, so these pioneer plants come in on the wind or with birds or bats or other animals, and their droppings. If we look at these species, they seem to have a few things in common. Usually they have a rosette at ground level, a deep taproot, and huge numbers of quickly dispersing seeds. By turning the soil year in and year out, we continually prepare the conditions for these species to proliferate. In the same way acacias burst forth after a bushfire to trap nutrients and grab nitrogen from the air, as they are legumes, so the post-glacial pioneer species save the soil from being washed away. The clue then is to plant into a situation where these conditions do not exist. There is a link in the show notes to a post from 2007 showing how no-till worked on a 9-year trial basis, and that 10, 11 years ago. It is doable on a broadacre scale. At the market garden level, what I've found works is mulch on raised beds. Not just any mulch will work, but anything except plastic will. Plastic has no place on our farmland. Food grade might have a place in the milking parlour or the dairy, but never on the soil. Who knows or has even looked at what leaches out of the stuff into the food system? The key to good mulch for me is to incorporate animal waste. That is, manures and urine in straw or spoiled hay. The reason I favour this mulch over straight straw or compost even is food plants and animals evolved together long before we humans decided we could grow our own. By recombining the animal with the plant, I more closely approach the natural systems I'm trying to emulate. In the same way Joel Salatin, link in the show notes, follows his herbivores, cattle, with his pastured poultry to mimic the birds picking over and distributing the manures of the bison herds, we need to constantly look for ways to mimic nature. For the good of our land, for the good of our crops, and by a happy coincidence to make our lives easier, shoveling animal bedding onto a recently harvested vegetable garden bed is a whole lot easier than weeding a ground level by hand, or even with a long-handled tool. It is a height of hubris to think in 10,000 years we could do better than 4 billion odd years of evolution. That is, if we think about biomimicry as a solution at all. So let's look to the natural world when we confront a problem. Ask yourself some questions. Is this thing, whatever it is, really a problem? Is nature putting in a stopgap measure to save my soils? What can I do to assist with the formation of niches that suit my crops and not the weeds? The solutions to most of our problems are right in front of us. We just have to take the time to see them, and then implement them in ways that don't make things worse. And on that happy note, I'll draw this episode to a conclusion. Remember, decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. This has been a JM Podcasting Services production. Link in the show notes.